صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, we ask Allah to again send His greatest peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all the blessings He has given us, and the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated and loyal on the path of our master after the Prophet, the commander of the faithful, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and his message, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, I'd like to express my gratitude for being invited to a MYC program. These Friday night programs have been an extremely important part of our community's history. I know growing up, I benefited greatly from them, and inshallah, you will continue to do the same. I hope in the discussion that we're going to have tonight that I can initiate the conversation, and then inshallah we can follow up with some questions and engage in a more so of a discussion. Because I believe that this conversation that we're going to have, the one titled on American Muslim identity, religion, citizenship and law, is something that affects us deeply and practically. As in each and every one of us here is a Muslim, inshallah, is a person who is an adherent of the faith of Islam, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Holy Quran that the religion of God, Deen Allah, the religion of God is Islam. Our faith that we're practicing, this beautiful faith that was sent to us by the seal of prophets Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, through the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and meant to be that mercy to mankind, that final message to encompass all people, wherever they may be in the world. So you and I, brothers and sisters, it's not a strange thing that we're here in the United States of America, in the Western Hemisphere, and that we are practicing our faith, the faith of Islam. Because it was our fate to be here. And it was based on the choices of our parents, or our grandparents, or even our great-grandparents to be in this country, to be in this nation. And some Muslims that are practicing in this nation, in this country that we call home, some have only had a history in this nation. So we have to also realize that when we're talking about American Muslims, we're not just talking about immigrant communities, we're also talking about people that have always been here and they don't have a history that's in the Middle East or South Asia or any other part of the world. Tonight, brothers and sisters, I'm going to begin the conversation on a few different levels. One, from a historical level, Islamically, when we look at our Islamic history and we see from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi to the rest of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and the movement of Ahlul Bayt, how did they deal with the idea of how a Muslim engages in a society? And particularly, how does a follower of Ahlul Bayt, who as followers of Ahlul Bayt, we've always generally been minorities within our community, even a community of Muslims, how did the Imams of Ahlul Bayt guide us in how we dealt with the society around us? So we're going to take a look at that. We're also going to take a look at how did the communities in the United States, mostly minority communities, that didn't necessarily have a full identity with the rest of the majority, how did they engage with society? And what were the struggles that they faced that we can learn from as well? And then finally, we want to compare these things and bring it all together, as in practically speaking, all of us here today, how do we deal with the multiple identities that we have? And is it okay for us to have multiple identities? Are we suffering from some type of identity crisis? Do I have to choose one identity over the other? Or can I have many identities? Be it religious, be it national, be it that of citizenship, be it that of ethnicity and culture? Is this possible? For example, let's take a quick poll around the room. If you are a Muslim and you identify as a Muslim, I want you to raise your hand. If you're a Muslim, raise your hand. Beautiful. If you are a follower of Ahlul Bayt, a Shia Muslim, raise your hand. If you are a male, raise your hand. If you're a female, raise your hand. If you're Iraqi or from Iraqi heritage or descent, raise your hand. If you're Lebanese or from Lebanese descent or heritage, raise your hand. If you're American, raise your hand. Okay, good. This is good. Now some might be like, I just have my green card, maybe I'm working on my citizenship, I'm not naturalized yet. Or maybe it's a little bit deeper. And maybe the idea of Americanism or being an American or identifying with that, even though I may have a US passport, is a little more complicated than we may assume. I remember growing up in my family, and in many families, there was a reference to al-American or al-American, right? We have this reference. My parents came to the United States along with my grandparents in the 1970s during the Lebanese Civil War. So they left Lebanon in the Civil War, leaving the havoc and the turmoil that was taking place and ruining our beloved country that we called Lebanon, right? They came to the United States to seek opportunity, to seek a better life. And like many of the stories of people that have immigrated to the United States, they were able to seek an opportunity and make a better life for themselves and their kids, their children, get educated, open up businesses, like many of our families here in Dearborn, Dearborn Heights, and in Michigan, and around the country in general. Mind you, if you weren't aware, there are a lot of Muslim communities, a lot of immigrant communities, specifically from some of the countries that we or our parents may call home, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, other countries like that, around the United States. Just last weekend, I was in Seattle, visiting a Muslim community in Seattle. And or part of it was for work, and part of it was also visiting a community there. It's so beautiful to see how diverse we are as a Muslim community. That community itself had people from Iraq, people from Lebanon, people from India, Pakistan, Khoja community, Iranians, Afghanis, people from all over the world. One of the things that they shared in the identity was that they all were Muslim. And most of them also felt American. So going back to my family and many of the families that we had, or we have, be it from Lebanon, Iraq, or other parts of the world, they came and they established a home here. See, some of our families might have had the plan to go back to Lebanon or Iraq, or maybe right now we still have the plan to maybe, as immigrant families, go back to the countries that we came from. And that we feel this sense of belonging to that home, our homeland. We're going to talk a little bit about that and how that works in being American or being here in the United States. But for the most part, we stayed. My mother got an education here. My father opened up businesses here. Myself and my siblings all became educated here. But by the way, we still also had relationships and ties back to what my parents and us call a homeland, being in Lebanon. But we call ourselves American. And there's a reason for that. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, from Al-Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, to the rest of our Imams, they gave us snippets, highlights of how do we engage with the community around us. One theme that we find throughout Ahlul Bayt's history is that they always respected the law of the land. And they were always cognizant of the society around them. Take a look at, for example, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, who during his lifetime, it was a very sensitive time. The ruling authorities were between the decline of the Umayyad dynasty, or the Umayyad Empire, which was, if you could remember back to the days and the stories that we remember during Ashura, would be through Muawiyah, Yazid, and the Umayyads that would come from them. See, Muawiyah came to rule for about 18 years after Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And from Muawiyah there would come Yazid. And then we would have the tragedy of Karbala. But the Umayyad dynasty would rule for almost 90 years, almost an entire century. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam still lived in that society that was ruled by the Umayyads. Some of the hadith I want to share with you today are from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam emphasized to his companions, to the believers, even with the decline of the Umayyad dynasty and the rise of the Abbasid dynasty, which would supposedly come to the aid and claim to be supporters of the followers of Ahlul Bayt, but their agenda would change. Or the agenda, in essence, was one that was not favorable to begin with. What Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam emphasized was he would tell his followers, his companions, he would tell them, go to their mosques, go to their funerals, visit their ill ones, talk to them, engage with them, be with them. When he was saying them, he was referring to the majority of society being people that didn't belong to our school of thought, our madhab, people that were not necessarily Shia Muslims. He was emphasizing what? That when you're living in a society as a minority, you're not to isolate yourself. Every minority community, be it ourselves here living as Muslims in the United States, or even as from a creed perspective, a theological perspective, as Shia Muslims living in a general Muslim society with a Sunni majority, Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam emphasized to us that do not isolate yourself. When you're looking at how you engage, do you isolate? Do you assimilate? Or do you integrate? Isolate means stay by yourself, don't talk to anybody, be in your bubble. Assimilate means let go of your principles, let go of your values, and just do whatever it takes to make sure that you're accepted by the people around you. You lose your sense of who you are and your values for the sake of the opportunity to be with the other people around you. Integration is that middle ground. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam emphasized that middle ground, where the Imam would emphasize and tell us, go and visit them, engage with them. Another hadith where Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam emphasizes to his companions, he says, do not remove your hand from the people. Because if you remove your hand from the people, they lose only one hand, but you lose many. And he says, the translation says, people need each other. Mind you, being in a community like ours in Dearborn, we're blessed. But at the same time, we can't get lazy. We have to realize, as a Muslim community living here, also as Americans, though we may have some of the comforts where we have a general Muslim community around us that can support us, we also have to be cognizant of our role and our responsibility to those that are different than us. Many of us may complain, and we're justified in it, in some of the rhetoric, and some of the violence, and some of the hate culture that has risen against Muslims, that generally has been called Islamophobia. And we're justified in being maybe tense, stressed out, or even nervous about it. Because certain people that hate Islam and have a fear of Islam are not justified in the actions that we follow with those preconceived notions. However, you and I, as Muslims here in the United States, as American Muslims, we also have a responsibility to ourselves and to everyone around us. How do we deal with that? Do we stand idly by, or do we allow ourselves to integrate and educate those around us? And I'm not saying by going around and passing out pamphlets. I'm talking about our presence. How do we be? How do we act? How do we carry ourselves? Be it at school, in the workplace. Let's say you have a classmate that's non-Muslim. I'm not talking about you preaching to that non-Muslim, or if you have a colleague that's non-Muslim. I'm not talking about sitting down and lecturing them and telling them the 101 of Islam and how we're not violent people and how we're a peaceful religion. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how do we confidently carry ourselves and live our lives as American Muslims. How do you make sure that you can do that and people aren't confused? You know how? We can't be confused ourselves. we have to realize what identities we're dealing with. We have to realize that Islam and being American and living in this country are not mutually exclusive. That my pride and my heritage and my belonging to my home country, if I am coming from an immigrant background, doesn't necessarily need to be sacrificed in order for me to live a fully integrated life as an American citizen. Can I have all of these multiple identities? Can I say that I am Muslim, Lebanese, Iraqi, Pakistani, Iranian, and American? Can I say all of these things and truly live confidently in all of those identities together? Our faith tells us yes, and our citizenship tells us yes. Now, some of us may be thinking, I'm not too sure about that, based on the experiences that we've had, not only as a people, but as a country. Now, let's look at some of the experiences, and then inshallah, we'll go back, and if we don't go back, remind me in the Q&A session to go back and provide some more examples. Let's go to some of the experiences of other minority communities in the United States. For example, the African American experience. African Americans, if you look at the identity itself, that hyphenated identity of being African American, many African Americans or Black Americans came to the United States as slaves. They come from that heritage of slavery. And they fought more than anyone else for their citizenship here in the United States. Imagine in the 1960s, in a Supreme Court decision, where an African American man was told, you're not a citizen of the United States, you're property. Imagine all of the hate that we may experience, or we have experienced as generally as a community or even as individuals, and how really hurtful it is. Have we ever experienced a Supreme Court telling you that you're chattel, that you're property? That is in the heritage of the African American experience, and we can learn a lot from that. Fast forward to the 1900s and the civil rights movement, where we had not just a fight on the ground with the African American civil rights movement, which, by the way, it wasn't just for African Americans, it was for everybody. The idea of equal citizenship and people having equal footing. Look at the ideas that were propagated by Frederick Douglass in the late 1800s and then by W.E.B. Du Bois. The idea of assimilation through self-assertion. And I want you to pay attention closely to these ideas. And maybe some of the students in the room, maybe high school or college or university students, might have been exposed to some of these ideas. The idea of assimilation through self-assertion, what does that mean? W.E.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass, they emphasize this idea that us as an African American community, we're going to assimilate into society, but we're going to preserve and assert our identity, our heritage, our ideals and principles as an African American community. Now, when we take that, we look at it and see the similarity of how Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam emphasize the idea of not isolation and not pure assimilation, but integration. We integrate in any society that we are in. As Muslims and as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we are never at odds with the society that we are in. And listen closely to this. Throughout history, you will find Ahlul Bayt, even when they disagreed politically with the ruling authority, even when they were in a position they themselves had the right to rule themselves as individuals, they would sacrifice that right in order to do what? To protect two things. And pay attention to these two things. Ahlul Bayt, throughout their movement, throughout history, and as we await the holy Imam, our awaited Savior, Imam al-Muntazar, Haj Jalal Moughania Sharif, there's two things that they emphasize and they protected. Two priorities. Protecting the body of Islam and protecting the lives of the believers. Anytime, any point in history, Imam Ali alayhi salam, through the 25-year experience where the first, the second, and third caliphs would rule, taking away his own personal right to rulership, he would sacrifice his own personal rights and not rise or fight against them. And he would actually be an advisor to the Muslim state in order to protect the lives of the believers and protect the religion of Islam. If you want to understand the way Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam moved, you look at these two principles. Now going back to the other examples of minority communities. The African American experience is one that we can definitely learn so much about. If you look at some other communities, maybe even Japanese internment. The Japanese American community during World War II was a community that was not necessarily an immigrant community, that had been there for generations, were citizens. But they experienced internment camps because they were considered to be a threat to the state. Now, I remember in law school, I studied this issue in a course called Race in American Law. And I studied how the movement of minority communities and how it dealt with the law, be it the African American community, be it the Japanese community, be it the Jewish community, be it the Catholic community, and how the institutions of law worked with these communities. American law and citizenship law is not perfect in the United States. And no one can claim that, but it's evolved. And it's evolved with people being engaged in the system to make sure that it changes for the better. Now sometimes we may feel, and I'll tell you as an attorney, I do see some things that are wrong in the system. But what happens if we stand idly by and allow the system to stay as it is? What happens if we are not fully engaged and educated about our rights and our obligations in this country that we call home? What happens if we just stand by and let other people tell our narrative and tell our story? What happens? Whatever experiences that we have as a community, and hurt and pain and violence and hatred, we can look to the experiences of other communities. If they didn't take a position, and I don't necessarily mean in protest, brothers and sisters. I don't necessarily mean taking to the streets and raising signs and calling out with slogans. I'm talking about, for the young and old here, when you look at yourself as a Muslim and you look at yourself as an American, you need to understand how these two work together. Just like, for example, how it worked in being a Muslim back home in Lebanon or Iraq or Iran or Pakistan or anywhere else. When we want to build a lasting community for ourselves here in the United States as Americans, we have to realize how all of this works together. And it comes to starting discussions like these. Because if we don't know how this works together, and for example, even though our parents or our grandparents may refer to other people as al-American or al-American, for us who were born and raised here or naturalized and will continue to call this home and aren't really going back anywhere, and we are Americans and we hold a US passport, that's kind of dangerous. You know why? Because just like other people may call us and label us and say, go back home, we may actually believe it. Because we didn't call this home to begin with. But if we look deep down, we know it's our home. And we know this is what we call home. And there's no other home. But it's something that we have to truly identify and discuss. And whether it comes from your citizenship identity, your national identity, your ethnic identity, your cultural identity, it's important for us to realize if any of those identities come in conflict with our religious identity, our creed, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained for us, no, that's an issue. And you have priorities. And this is essentially how it works. Whether it's your culture, your ethnicity, your nationality, whatever it may be. If that goes at odds with the religious identity and what's prescribed by the faith, for example, you have a wedding celebration that you're celebrating your family, your culture, you're celebrating the union of two families, be it Lebanese, Iraqi, whatever heritage it may be, and the time of prayer comes, it's a very easy choice to make, but many of us fail at it. Or we're having a sahra at home, and we're having a good time, and it's family and friends, but the time of prayer comes. Or let's say a discussion comes and it's about gossip, it's about talking about other people. These identities, a cultural identity, an ethnic identity, or even, for example, watching the Super Bowl or watching another game that's the American game, right? Who here is a baseball fan? It's okay, raise your hand. I got you. You're the first one. All right, baseball fan. What is it called? America's pastime, right? Who here's a football fan? All right. Basketball fan. Detroit Pistons, how are they doing? All right? They need new players. When we're watching these games, we definitely feel, if you look at it, what any country it may be, when you're talking about sports and food, who likes hamburgers, fries, hot dogs, right? That's American as it can get. I remember one time I was visiting a church, and I was invited to speak at a church on a panel. And they asked me, after the panel discussion, they asked me, you know, we were so moved by what you talked about. And it was essentially talking about how Muslims and non-Muslims as Americans in this country, how we can engage in and basically fight against hatred. And essentially, it was a very positive conversation, but one of the attendees asked, like they raised their hand and they said, how can we help you in your struggle? I told them, you know how? I told them, let's talk to one another. I want to be able to have a conversation with my neighbor. In fact, you know what we should do? We should hold a barbecue. Who here likes burgers and dogs? Everybody. They started laughing. Why? Because there's that commonality. I emphasize something. I may, as an American Muslim, relate more to a Christian American, or an American Christian, or American Jew, or American Sikh, or an American something else, or an American whatever background they may have. I may relate more to that person than I may relate to a Muslim from another country or another place in some of the commonalities that we have, right? This is something important for us to realize. But we have to emphasize that you do not sacrifice any part of your belief in order to be accepted by other people. And this is something that we should encourage, not just ourselves as Muslims, but even Christians, Jews, anybody else. I don't want you to sacrifice your faith in order for us to have commonality. We don't need to do that. There's enough commonality between us. Each person from each faith and each community and each group needs to have the confidence to be able to strike a conversation and say, Assalamu alaikum, hi, how are you? I'm so-and-so. Yes, I'm an American Muslim. And there's nothing at all funny or wrong or different or confusing about that. But we need to have the conversation with ourselves internally first to make sure that it's actually there. When we look at the people around us from a human perspective, and I know some of you may have been involved in some of the conversations that we've had in the past about identity and how as Shia Muslims, as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, inspired by the teachings of the Prophet and his holy family, when we look at other people, we look at them based on commonality. We look at how can I care for this individual no matter who they are. As followers of Ahlul Bayt, we have that core identity. Beyond that core identity from a theological perspective, but implementing it on a sociological level, so how we deal with one another. Many of you might have heard this. Core identity, Shia, follower of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, a Shia Muslim. Outside of that, you have the identity in Islam, as being a follower of the religion of Islam. Meaning what? Just because I am a follower of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam doesn't mean it's exclusive from being a Muslim. I believe in the identity in Islam and I have ownership in that identity just like anybody else. I'll give you a small snippet. When my brother Ali and I were in high school, we were commemorating the month of Muharram. It was during the time of the commemorations of Ashura. And one of my brother's friends, who was not Shia, he was a Sunni Muslim, he came up to my brother and he asked him, he said, Ali, I wanted to ask you. He's like, yeah, what's up? He said, hey, are you Shia or are you Muslim? Right? Now my brother quickly answered and said, what's the difference? Being able to intelligently absorb that and give a response that would encompass both the ignorance and show him what's up. Because as Shia Muslims, we don't believe that as a Shia Muslim, you have this separate identity from Islam. And you best believe, my dear brothers and sisters, our maraja, our scholars, they emphasize, do not move your Shia identity outside of the identity of Islam. And even when you emphasize your love for Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, you emphasize that love as him being the greatest student and companion and follower and exemplar of what? Of service of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Because that's why we love Imam Ali alayhi salam. Because he showed us that true example of what it means to be a Muslim, what it means to be a follower of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. That's why we love him so much. Not for any sectarian idea, not for any idea that we want to be different from other people. It's only because Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, through the decree and the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he told us this is the path for you to take in order for you to best follow this beautiful faith, the final religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when you look at that and you see it, we have ownership in Islam just like anybody else. Outside of that second sphere, you have the third sphere being what? Monotheism, the belief in Allah, one God, which we share with our Christian and Jewish brothers and sisters. So that identity that you have the identity also with your Christian brothers and sisters. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he emphasized in a written document, a letter, I believe it's letter 53 of Nahj al-Balagha, the peak of eloquence. And the peak of eloquence, which is a compilation of the writings, the letters, the sermons and sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam. They were compiled by the 11th century scholar Al-Sharif al-Radi. He put these all together so that we, how many years later? 11th century, what's that mean? That's about 1,000 years later, we can look and see these are Imam Ali's words. This is what he taught. In letter 53 of Nahj al-Balagha, he instructs his appointed governor in Egypt, Malik al-Ashtar, and he tells him, O Malik, do not be a ferocious beast over your citizens, your subjects. You are to treat people as one of two kinds, either your brother in faith or your equal in humanity. Now some of you may be even repeating that hadith with me. And that's such a beautiful thing, but we need to realize what that means when we look at other people. And I don't mean in a general sense where you can go to interfaith events and say, we're brothers in faith or equal in humanity, let's all hold hands and we feel really nice together. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you look at another human being. We covered the first three spheres. The last sphere, the fourth sphere, is what? Humanity. Even if a person does not believe in God, even if a person does not share in any of those identities with you, he's still a human being. And guess what? He or she is your equal. Even if they don't believe in God. Imam Ali told us, I'm not better than you and you're not better than me. No matter who you are, we're equals. When we talk about equality and citizenship, we as Muslims can contribute to the evolving law in this nation and the practice of what it means to be a citizenship of a nation where people are treated equally. But we have to be engaged. We are blessed with this heritage and a practice of faith that allows us to be a beacon of light and mercy to those around us. Allow yourself to engage, but before that, what? You need the confidence to engage. And what? The education to engage. This is a call to all of my young brothers and sisters. Be educated. Do not let go of your education. Do not take your education lightly. And I don't mean in the classroom. I emphasize especially in the classroom. But even outside the classroom, educate yourself. Take moments to learn. Every opportunity, every person that you cross paths with can be a teacher or a student. Don't let go of your education. You have a responsibility. You've been blessed with the greatest religion on the face of this earth. You've been blessed with the greatest role models that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent to this earth. You know why? Because even the role models that other faiths have, you have them too. The prophets of the Old Testament are our prophets as well. Christians and Jews, when they refer to their biblical stories, we refer to them as well. We have Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam who come from the lineage of prophets. We have no excuse but to stay educated and to continue in our education and to engage. Because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants of us. Do not take this lightly. Imam Ali alayhi salam, and we'll end with this story, and even though some of you may have heard it before, it's always good to emphasize. Why? ذكر نفعت الذكرى. Remind, for surely remembrance will benefit. Imam Ali alayhi salam was walking in the market, and he saw an elderly man begging. The elderly man was going around asking people for some help. No one would help him. Ask for food, for water, for something. I barely have clothes on my back, no money in my pocket, no one to help me. An old man. Nobody would help him. Imam Ali alayhi salam was just watching the scene. By the way, when Imam Ali was walking in the market, he was the Khalifa of his time. And even though Imam Ali alayhi salam only ruled for 4.5 years before he was assassinated, Imam Ali alayhi salam established what just governance was and what it meant to truly lead with equality. Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he walked in the market, he was the Khalifa, but he didn't let anybody know by wearing fancy clothes and walking around with gold and jewels and being carried like a monarch. He would walk like the people and amongst the people. So he would see this elderly man begging, and he looked around, no one helping him. He said, what is this? What's going on? Why isn't anyone helping this man? Someone responds and says, he's just a Christian. The hadith says that Imam Ali alayhi salam became so infuriated that the color changed in his face. Imam Ali alayhi salam would call to those around him and basically allow them to recognize who he is and say, I'm not leaving from this spot until you go to the treasury and you take care of this man. How dare you? Use him up in his young age, and you have to have the confidence to be able to do that. And that confidence only comes from what? Being that student of the faith. Where Imam Ali alayhi salam himself said, I'm only a servant of the servants of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. In that spirit, let us be the servant of the servant of the servants of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, and truly educate ourselves and engage, because we have no excuse otherwise. I end with that, my dear brothers and sisters. If there are any questions, comments, feedback, again, this is barely touching the surface. There's books and books about these subjects, and I encourage all of you, if you need even some recommendations on books, to deepen your understanding of our faith, deepen our understanding of citizenship, what it means, deepen our understanding of identity. Inshallah, there's recommendations that I can provide, but I'll leave the floor to you. If you have any comments, questions, any other feedback, I'd definitely love to benefit from you. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على نبينا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. تفضل حاج. عليكم السلام حاج.
The question is, how can one person avoid assimilation? Because I think that's the most difficult thing, is retaining your own identity. So what can you tell our young people? What can they do to avoid assimilation?
Okay. Assimilation being, and though I mentioned that previously, but just to remind, assimilation being losing one's identity that they have in their mother language, their mother religion, their heritage, things that they brought from their families and their lineage, right? Assimilation being, I'm going to indulge myself in the society that I'm in to be accepted and to be one of the general masses, one of the majority, and I'm sacrificing everything else. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam emphasized to us through one, the tradition of the Holy Prophet, where he says, لا تعرب بعد الهجرة. لا تعرب بعد الهجرة means there is no going back to the pre-Islamic age, with the sense, and ta'arub coming from the sense of being a nomad or being a Bedouin, which referred to at that time being one who was uncivilized. right? And civilization came through Islam being one of enlightenment. So there's no going back away from enlightenment after the Hijrah. The Hijrah being where the Prophet migrated from Mecca to Medina. And actually some of the earlier migrations that actually took place were to Abyssinia, where the Muslims left persecution. And this is important for us to understand our history, and part of the answer to this is actually understanding our history and studying our history. Where the Muslims left Mecca, where they were being persecuted by the chieftains of Quraysh, who were pagans, and that wanted to kill and hurt any person who called himself a Muslim, because it essentially hurt their way of life, hurt their economy, hurt their politics, hurt their society, right? Where the Prophet emphasized, after this hijrah, after you've moved and you've gone away from the threat of being killed and persecuted, there's no going back. You've been enlightened. So what does that mean and how does that translate? To us practically, if we're leaving a, let's say, a Muslim society, or, mind you, a society that's tolerant of your faith and allows you to practice your faith willingly, like the community in Abyssinia. Please pay attention to this example. The community in Abyssinia was a Christian community that welcomed the Muslims and gave them a safe haven, right? It was a Christian community that gave Muslims a safe haven. It was not a Muslim community, and it did not convert to a Muslim community. And the Prophet gave specific instructions to Ja'far al-Tayyar and told him, who was leading the group of people that were migrating to Abyssinia in Africa. He told them, do not preach your faith to them. Do not try to change their religion. Respect all of their laws. Do not have any kind of violation to their property. And a number of other instructions. Basically, follow the rules of the land and practice freely, because they're giving you the ability to do so. Right? How does that translate for us? You live in a community, you live in a society, let's say, a society, not a community. You live in a society that's tolerant of your religion. You have the freedom to practice your religion freely. You have the freedom to do so, but you don't impose yourself on other people. You don't become a threat to other people. And that's essential with us when it comes to our role anywhere in the world, whether it be as a minority within Islam, as Shia Muslims, or as Muslims generally in a non-Muslim society. We don't threaten the people around us. That's essential. So, coming from that heritage of belief and understanding, we move away from assimilation when we're strong in our faith and our creed. We move away from assimilation when we know how to deal with the idea of being American, but at the same time holding dear to my faith. Brothers and sisters, a lot of times when we talk about assimilation, or I even remember growing up where this person is, for example, Americanized, right? He's Americanized, mitimrik, right? The idea of being Americanized is what? It's referring to the negative ideas, the negative practices that's away from our faith. Where this person, for example, doesn't speak their mother tongue anymore, right? And this is important. Why? Not for the sake of Arabic in Arabic, from a religious perspective. Now, generally our religion respects a person in their heritage, whatever the heritage may be. Whether you're of Arab descent, you're of African descent, you're of Indian descent, you're a Khoja, you're an Iranian, whatever it may be. Our religion respects that. And if you look at the religion of Islam, especially the tradition of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, there was such an emphasis on respecting diversity that even the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they married into different cultures. Many of them married, not from being of the tribe of Quraysh or of the Hashimis. They married from Iran, they married from Africa, they even married from the Byzantine Empire. Emphasizing what? The idea of diversity is a beautiful idea, and we accept diversity. However, make sure your principles are in order. Someone may think, oh, I'm here to be diverse, or I'm here to become an American. I need to become Americanized. So let me do everything that I see in society generally. It doesn't work like that. Even religious Christians, or religious Jews, or religious Hindus, or religious Sikhs, when they want to practice and be American, they're essentially doing what? Making sure that they have their priorities in order. For example, If it means American to go to a bar, then I'm not going to do that because it's in conflict with my faith. I'm not going to go to a bar. If it means to go to a club, I'm not going to do that. That's in conflict with my faith. If it means that I'm going to neglect my prayers when I'm going to Cedar Point, on my senior trip. And by the way, this is something that, some of us may think, oh, it's surprising. Some of us be like, oh, I didn't even think about it. And there's different ranges of reactions in the audience. But I remember a young brother of mine, he came up to me and he said, so what do I do when I go to Cedar Point? Like the idea didn't even cross his mind. He felt like when I'm going to Cedar Point, basically, do I just pray when I get home? And I told him, Muhammad Ali Hassan, put in the name. I told him, no, you pray when you're there. He's like, really? Oh, I guess so. Like the grass. And I'm like, yeah, pray on the grass. It's okay. You can pray there. That's fine. And I remember when I went to Cedar Point on my senior trip, that was a struggle too. No one prayed. And I was looking around, I'm like, hey, why do you pray? And it wasn't on the time of prayer. It was like literally before sunset. I'm like, hey, everybody. It's like, okay, no, I was just like maybe 2 of us, right? And what? We were all Muslims. But that's something what we have to realize. That the idea of assimilation sometimes is not even a threat because you're living in a society or you're living in a community particularly where the people you go to high school with. Now I know we have some people that live in Ann Arbor or in Canton and then going a little bit more west, and maybe now you're kind of facing some of these issues. But sometimes it's not even that. You can be going to Fortson High School or Dearborn High. I remember when I went to Fortson, Dearborn High was not as Arab as it is, or Crestwood. Fortson was the Arab school. Now they're all in Arab, meaning ethnic, which is also assuming that they're mostly Muslim, which is, by the way, something else that we need to be mindful of because not all Arabs are Muslim, and we need to realize that, right? But the threat of assimilation, where we're losing our Islamic identity, our Islamic ideals and principles, can be from within our own community. And that's not telling you what. It's the threat of being Americanized. It's just the threat of being non-religious. And this is something, by the way, that's experienced. I go back to Lebanon and I visit Iraq often. Alhamdulillah, I have the opportunity to go visit family in Lebanon. I go on ziyarah often. It's a blessing. These topics are essentially issues in both of those countries. The threat of basically moving away from religion. It's not because of America. It's just because of people. And not giving religion its due importance. I'm sorry, Hajj, you had a question.
I want to go back to a point you made, and I have a question. So a lot of our families have immigrated here. Some of them for persecution of their faith, some of them from war, civil wars. And we've come to this country that is labeled as a country that was built on Christian doctrine and Christian faith. But yet now we're at a time when a lot of the laws and the civil rights movements that are happening are going away from Christian faith and in conflict with our Muslim faith. And so when you say that when you migrate and you accept the law of the land, what is our job as Muslims now with what's going on with the civil rights movement for, some of these liberal views? I don't want to get specific because there's some young people in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
But is it our job to stand in the way of others' freedom, other people's civil rights? Or is it to each their own? I will raise my family as a Muslim family, and to each their own. Everybody will be judged on what they do. What is our job? What are your thoughts on that?
For the adults in the room, did you get the gist of what the Hajj was talking about? Okay. So with this particular conversation, it's an even more sensitive one. Why? Because it comes into the idea of al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy an al-munkar, where it's not merely the idea of how to exist and coexist in a society and how to engage, as Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam emphasized to us, integration is the key, the middle path between isolation and assimilation. We're not extremes, we're not extremists, we pick the middle path. When it comes to this particular idea, this is what, from my understanding and speaking to scholars, Again, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a scholar of the faith for me to give a jurisprudential edict or idea or an opinion, right? And this is something, by the way, generally for all of us to pay attention to. When we're listening to people on the podium, make sure that you're understanding where this person is coming from and what they're sharing. Just because someone comes up on the podium doesn't give them the freedom to basically make religious laws and edicts and opinions. Even, by the way, if they're necessarily wearing the religious robe. So that's also allowing or essentially emphasizing for our community to also be educated when it comes to, you know, students of the Islamic seminary, scholars of the Islamic seminary, and being a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to our belief. For example, when you go to the hospital, you need to know who's a nurse, who's a doctor, who's a resident physician, and you can just literally ask, you know. And we have medical professionals in the room, Haj, where basically as a patient or as a family member, you can just ask, well, who's the doctor? Where's he studied? Where has he been? It's okay, you can ask for the resume, you can look them up online, right? So these things are important. It's good for us to be a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to that. When it comes to this, what I would encourage from my understanding is be engaged so that you can actually voice an opinion within the system. So if you personally, regardless of your religious background, want something one way or another, you can engage. Just like other people from the Christian and the Jewish and every other religious or ethnic group engages and participates. However, it's important for us not to do one thing, where we become ultra complacent and ultra accepting of just anything. Well, everybody can do whatever they want in the world, and we can't say anything about it. We're not necessarily saying to pass judgment or to act on any kind of thing that's unethical in our faith, like being hateful or being violent or anything like that. However, we need to be smart in how we engage. So, mind you, the way I'm answering, it's not just because of the young people in the room. I'm actually answering like this because our scholars educate us in a way that you don't take a bold stance on everything. There's certain things that you don't need to talk about. Inside of your home, you discuss. But let's say in the public domain, it might not be in the interest of the community for us to make a bold decision or make a bold stance on it. So this is where we learn from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. For example, there were revolts, rebellions, and revolutions that took place against the ruling authorities of the time, be it the Umayyads or even the Abbasids, mostly the Umayyads. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam a lot of times basically just didn't take a position. They didn't condone and they didn't condemn. We can learn from that. Not we can learn from that. We have to learn from that. And then always being in consultation with our scholars. And our scholars will generally say, they'll give you the principles, they'll give you insight, and then they'll also say, what are you viewing as a person who's living in that society and as an expert in your own field, what are you seeing on the ground? And then taking that together and working on it. It's not as simple as we would like, unfortunately, but that's the nature of the beast.
How would you bridge the American values with the true Islamic values and at the same time preserve our Islamic identity?
True American values and Islamic values are often hand in hand. Hands down. When you look at the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the way the law has evolved over the years, you see a movement towards better equality, better justice, better equity. Islam was built on that. If you find anything that's in contradiction, you need to try to understand why. A lot of the things that are meant to be, this is what it means to be American, like, you know, you eating a, what's that food? Haj, you can remind me.
Sloppy Joe.
Not a sloppy Joe, a pig blanket or something, what's that called?
Pigs in a blanket.
Pigs in a blanket, right? So the idea of wrapping bacon, wrapping hot dogs in bacon, right? So someone might tell you, hey, this is what it means to be an American. Eating that kind of hot dog, pigs in a blanket, or a corn dog, and watching a baseball game, and then drinking a cup of beer, and that's what it means. But that's a very unsophisticated idea of what it means to be American. Go talk to some other Americans, they'll tell you, I don't do that. What are you talking about? So we have to be, just like, for example, within our cultural communities. For example, you might find, oh, ما كل اللبنانية بيعملوا هيك. All the Lebanese do this. No, they don't. You go to some parts of the Junub, they don't do that. You go to some parts of Libya, they don't do that. You go to Beirut, they don't do that. It depends on where you're coming from. Does that mean that because this person eats kibbeniyya this way or eats emalse, adds a little bit more smeed here, that's what it means to be Lebanese? No, it doesn't. Right? Now, I'm sorry for the reference. Maybe some of the non-Lebanese are not getting my gist here, but if we're going to go into these different examples, be it the different timan and marag that we have, with the Iraqi community, or the bagilab dihin, whatever it may be, you may cook it differently. And I'm using food why? Because it relates to everybody. Food is often the bridge to people's hearts. Trust me, I've been in situations where people would look at me as, oh, that's the Lebanese guy, let's say from an Arab setting, and I'm sitting with a bunch of Iraqis. Once they see me dig into that bagilab dihin, the way the other Iraqis do, I'm good, right? And once, by the way, the Iraqi who's sitting down with a bunch of Lebanese eats that malsa or eats that kibbeniyya the way the Lebanese do, you're good to go. And I'm using, again, this example, why? It's very simple to bridge the gap between cultures. It's very simple. And at the same time, once you do that, for example, you might eat a hot dog, but it's a halal hot dog. You might eat a hamburger. When I offered that idea to those people in the church, and I said, let's have a barbecue, I told them, afterwards, I'm like, I'm serious about this, but I'm bringing the meat. And they're like, all right, we love Dearborn meat, So we can get beyond so much. They don't care at that point. Human beings are often very simple. They don't care at that point what my religious practices are, because why? Now they see me as a human being. Now it goes back to the hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, we're all equals. But you need some practical implementation with that. It's okay, let's sit down and eat together. And you know what? We love food and we're very hospitable culturally. Let's bring people into our homes. But again, it needs to have education and confidence. You bridge American and Islamic values by what? By understanding both of them and making sure they're not in contradiction with one another. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Tfadal, Haj, afwan.
What are your thoughts on voting?
Voting. Okay. Do you guys want a beer for another hour? They're like, no, Haj, why'd you ask that question? This is simple. Voting. If you don't vote and you're of age to vote, you're basically saying that you're, like, for example, let's say you're 18, you're just getting to that age of, maturity, of adulthood. And you still live at home though. Your mom or dad tells you, listen, you come home and you sit with us anytime, maybe just 15 minutes, anytime between 8 in the morning and 8 at night, anytime, you pick the time. Just give us 15 minutes of your time, and guess what? We will listen to you and do whatever you want. Just give us 15 minutes from 8 to 8 on this particular day, and we'll listen to you and we'll do whatever you want. Imagine you had the opportunity. Youngsters in the room, if you had the opportunity, would you take it? If you take it, raise your hand. Absolutely, right? All right. I want you to take that mentality, and when you turn 18, or if you're already 18, or if you're above the age of 18, I want you to take it and you take it to the polls. Why? Because as a community, if we're not engaging with the opportunity to voice our concern and voice what we want, whatever it may be. Someone may say, oh, all of the people on the ballot, I don't like them. We had President Trump and President Hillary Clinton. What a great option.
I'm not even talking about national politics. I'm talking about things that affect Dearborn and Dearborn Heights, things that affect the state of Michigan. A good friend of mine is a representative in the state of Michigan. Why? How? We have friends that are judges, friends that are in positions of influence. Why? By the way, it wasn't always because our community was voting. It was because they engaged with other communities and got their trust and had them vote for them. But imagine our community, the Muslim community, always took the opportunity where they could sit down with that parent of theirs and take them for their word and engage and get what they wanted. So take the idea and take it with you the next election cycle. Because if we don't vote, honestly, and I'm saying this in a mosque, it's plain stupid. It's a shame. Because it only takes 15 minutes of our time. And we may think, we're not going to influence, we're not going to have an impact, what's it matter? No, we will. But guess what? When we collectively continue to have that backwards mentality of we're not going to have an influence, yes, we will never have an impact or an influence. But when we collectively, one by one, begin to change that, watch out, world. Got something interesting going on. Thank you for bringing that up, Haj. Anyone else? Tell me.
What about school shootings?
What?
I mean, anything could happen. There's lots of people protesting. But will school shootings stop? Or after all that protesting, will it really stop?
So when it comes to protesting, people often share their sentiments, share their concern by protesting, right? Protesting can be a double-edged sword. Protesting could be good, protesting could be bad. Generally, when we look at our engagement, if you find someone protesting but they're not voting, with all due respect, and I say this as one who is involved in the community, has been active in the community a long time, as a practicing attorney, when it comes to rights and liberties, you can practice those First Amendment rights all you want. But guess what? If you're not voting, you're not advancing yourself. You're just the Bill of Rights, by the way, is a bare minimum for us. That's basically, something that, this is the basics of how you live in a country. These are your rights. When it comes to voting, that's a whole different ballgame. Now, with school shootings particularly, just like other travesties, and just like other things that happen in the world, look at the wars, look at the killings, not just with schools, but shootings across the country. Young people die every day in the country. And though maybe the African American community is often probably the most targeted group when it comes to that, or the group that receives the short end of the stick when it comes to that, it affects generally the community, the entire community in the United States. What can you and I do to affect change? It could be a protest. It could become more educated yourself. It could be trying to engage with your legislators, the people that were elected into positions of power, like your state legislator or your congresspeople, and see, what are they doing? President Trump wanted to arm teachers. And this isn't like, one of the first nonsensical thing that we hear from our dear president, but what do we think about that? And we may think wonderful things, and we may post them on Facebook and share them on Instagram and even tweet about them just like the president does. But how are you actually affecting change? I've seen young people as young as 11 and 12 send letters to the congressman, and congressmen read them. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a couple years, and I was blessed with the opportunity to see how these systems work. And you'd be surprised how effective and impactful one person can be with one letter or one phone call, one thought, one idea. Well, you have to believe in yourself and have the confidence to actually push forward and do that. apology accepted.
If a little child died and they didn't pray, they didn't know how to pray, and their parents are Sunnis, and then if they pray for the child that's dead, and then they remake it, but their prayers are wrong. Can it be right, like to remake the praise for the child that's dead?
Can you repeat the question? I mean, we can.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're asking is that if, let's say, a Sunni family, a child dies, and then the family, his prayers were incorrect to begin with, the family wants to make up his prayers for him, would they be accepted? Is that your question? Okay. So regardless of the family being Sunni or Shia, when we look at, from a jurisprudential perspective, you would also need to ask some more questions, being, one, did the child have an obligation to pray in the first place? Also, did they know while they were alive if their prayers were being prayed incorrectly? Who knew that basically he was praying incorrectly? And did they have an obligation themselves to actually inform him of his prayers being prayed incorrectly? Or was it basically he didn't pray? So there's a bunch of, from a jurisprudential perspective, there's a lot of different questions to see what is your fiqhi obligation in that situation, right? But on another kind of ethical perspective, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from a person who does not know what they were doing but thought they were doing it correctly? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts from people based on their knowledge. So for example, we'll take it even farther back. What if a child or even a grown man or a grown woman didn't follow God or believe in God in the way we have in Islam, but was never in their lifetime exposed to the religion of Islam? Will this person go to hell or will they not? We, brothers and sisters, as followers of Ahlul Bayt, we don't send people to hell. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us instructions in the Holy Quran. For example, certain oppressors, people that have done certain wrongs, their punishment is hellfire. That's God's judgment. Some things are very clear to us. This person did 1, 2, 3, God says in the Holy Quran, or let's say the hadith, the Prophet, the Imam said 1, 2, 3, this person did this, this is their punishment. But generally, we don't send people to hell. We don't say, you're not a Shia, you're going to hell, you're not a Muslim, you're going to hell. We don't do that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges people based on their knowledge, what they know. If they knew and they did wrong, they will be punished. If they did not seek mercy and seek forgiveness from Allah, they did not repent. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives all sins, except disbelieving in Him. But what if that disbelief, for example, they didn't know about it? He was, let's say, a pagan, or he was living in a jungle, he just had no knowledge whatsoever. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges them based on their knowledge. Because God is a just God. And God is all merciful. Answer? Even though I'm sorry, again, it's a little more complicated than just saying yes or no, but I'm sorry. I'll bless.
What is the most important thing that the Prophet said, and what's it mean?
Did everyone hear that? Abbas, man. I should have just got off the podium. What is the most important thing and what does it mean? La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. There's no God but God. That was the core of Prophet Muhammad's message. La ilaha illallah. And that, my dear brothers and sisters, if we understood that, what that means, man, we wouldn't just be voting. Man, we'd be doing a lot more. Alhamdulillah.
So let's say this person reads Quran all the time, he's in the Jama, but he doesn't pray.
He reads Quran all the time and is in the Jama but does not pray? ايش قاعد يسوي؟ Is he still alive? Again, we don't send people to hell. So basically, if he stays like this and then he passes away, and God give him a long life, but let's say he stays like this and he passes away, God judges him based on what he knew. So if he knows he has to pray, and he's going to the Jami', and he's reading Quran, but he's not praying, he's going to Fawatih, and he's not, God judges him based on that knowledge. So, and this is the thing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is a key I think we'll all benefit from. God is all merciful. The mercy of God cannot be comprehended. We have narrations that tell us the mercy of God, when people come on the day of judgment, they will be floored by how merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. You cannot imagine. However, you and I, we can't take that for granted and we can't take advantage of that. You and I, every single time we sin, and I speak to myself before I speak to anybody else, every time I sin, I'm telling God, no thanks. I'm telling God, I got this. Think about that. No matter what the sin is, no matter what it is, just think about it. And it's hard. It's a hard thing to face. When you're saying and acknowledging the fact, God's telling me to do one thing and I'm like, I'm good. You want that mercy? You want those bounties? You want that everything? You want that success, that happiness? Stop turning your face away from God. Because we do that every single time we sin. Every single time. A student came to one of the grand scholars, Sheikh Bahjat, in the holy city of Qom. And he asked him, knowing that the scholar was such a grand scholar, so knowledgeable and so pious, he asked him, what can I do to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He was thinking he was going to give them this secret potion. You do these prayers, you do this dua, you fast this amount of days, you do istighfar this 1, 2, 3, you do all these different things. He was waiting for this prescription, the schedule. He told him 2 words. Don't sin. Don't sin. Imagine that. How come we never had a Muslim president? Because Muslims don't vote. We haven't had a Muslim president in the country because, and let's kind of take this back, even though some people believe that Barack Obama was Muslim. So some might tell you, we had a Muslim president for this country. What you talking about? We had a Muslim president, but we didn't. President Obama professed that he was a Christian and belonged to so-and-so church. We haven't had a Muslim president in the country for a similar reason why we haven't had a Jewish president in the country. It can do with the fact that there's such a small population of Muslims in the country. Muslims make up maybe about 1%, 1 to 2% of the country, if that. Jews also make around that same amount, depending on kind of which think tank you're asking for polling purposes. That has to do with it. And it also has to do with the amount of engagement we have. For example, the city of Dearborn, the city of Dearborn Heights, before asking the President of the United States, look at communities that have a majority of Muslims in the community, but you don't have a Muslim mayor. And it also could be that maybe the Muslim community and people that are active politically, they're not necessarily running for those positions because maybe the person in that position is serving the Muslim community best that possibly could be served. Possibly. But we need to be engaged to realize, why is this and why is that? And again, it's no simple answer of, even the simple answer that said, Muslims don't vote. It's more so to be to joke with you. Hope you accepted the joke.
I did.
Okay, very good. Appreciate it. Haj.
A statement.
A statement?
Very important for
Okay.
our youth. It's a quote from Imam
Ahsante. Excellent. Falls very much in line with what we've been talking about tonight, with educating ourselves. Our faith, by the way, this is something extremely important, and our grand scholars emphasize this. Your faith is not a heritage. Your faith, your religion, your school of thought is not a heritage. It's a practice, and it lives with you through your practice. Not by being basically the person who attends just for cultural purposes. Hajj, how are we on time? Because I know it's past 10 o'clock.
Everybody loves you, Hajj. Nobody likes
Everyone loves Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam because we're bringing remembrance to him and the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay, what I'll do is I'll stick around for a few more minutes, inshallah, to take some questions if anybody else has. Thank you for engaging in this conversation. I hope this is first of many. And if you want some recommendations when it comes to books, because books is the way for us to educate ourselves, even though I know it can be taxing, it could be boring, but we got to push ourselves and make it happen. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على نبينا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.